In July 1974, an American Secretary of State flew to Riyadh and made a deal that nobody announced publicly. No treaty, no press conference, no vote in Congress. Henry Kissinger sat across from Saudi officials and offered something straightforward: American military protection, American weapons, American security guarantees. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would do two things: sell its oil only in US dollars and take the profits, the billions pouring in every month, and put them into American government bonds. The Saudis agreed. That handshake didn't just set oil prices. It wired the entire global financial system to run on American debt. For 50 years, every country that needed oil had to first get dollars, which meant every country on earth was, in some way, working for Washington. That arrangement just broke, and the consequences reach much further than most people realize. To understand what's happening now, you need to understand what the petrodollar actually was, because most explanations get it wrong. It wasn't just about pricing oil in dollars. That part mattered less than people think. Currencies are exchangeable. You can buy oil priced in dollars while paying in euros. The mechanics aren't complicated. The real mechanism was what happened after the sale. When Saudi Arabia sold oil, it received dollars, hundreds of billions of them. Those dollars had to go somewhere, and the deal with Kissinger said they go into U.S. Treasury bonds, American government debt. This created a loop. America printed dollars. Countries used those dollars to buy oil. Oil exporters recycled those dollars back into American debt, which gave America cheap borrowing costs, which let America spend more than it earned year after year without the normal consequences. Every empire that runs a reserve currency eventually discovers this privilege. You write checks and nobody cashes them. The bills just keep circulating. Until one day they don't.
Britain learned this the hard way. By 1928, sterling was still the world's dominant reserve currency. Britain had already lost its position as the largest economy. America overtook it in the late 1800s, but the currency lagged behind. It kept circulating, kept being trusted. Then came 2 world wars. Debt piled up, the gold backing eroded. And in 1944, at a conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, British economist John Maynard Keynes sat across from American negotiators and watched sterling get replaced. Not overnight, over decades. But once the process started, it couldn't be stopped. The dollar didn't replace sterling because America declared victory. It replaced it because the underlying reality had already shifted. The currency was the last thing to catch up. What's worth noting is how long Britain tried to hold on, and how much that cost them. Now look at the dollar. America's debt is approaching $37 trillion. The annual interest payments alone now exceed the entire defense budget. The debt-to-GDP ratio sits at around 120%, 4 times higher than it was when Paul Volcker broke inflation in the 1980s. For decades, this didn't matter much, because the petrodollar loop kept demand for American debt artificially high. Oil exporters had to buy treasuries. It was part of the arrangement. That loop is now cracking. In February 2026, the war in Iran disrupted oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran began demanding payment for safe passage in Chinese yuan. Saudi Arabia, which had been running budget deficits in 2024 and 2025, wasn't recycling large surpluses into treasuries anymore. France quietly moved 129 tons of gold from New York back to Paris. Germany had already repatriated 674 tons from American and British vaults. These aren't panicked moves, they're deliberate. Central banks don't repatriate gold because they're optimistic about the system.
Deutsche Bank published a note in March 2026 warning that the Iran war could accelerate what they called erosion in petrodollar dominance. Not a collapse, not a sudden implosion, an erosion. That word matters. Sterling didn't collapse in a week. It eroded over 30 years. And by the time most people noticed, the damage was done. Britain spent those decades trying to defend a currency status that the underlying economy could no longer support. The cost was enormous. In foreign reserves burned, in economic policies distorted, in global influence surrendered, one compromise at a time. The Council on Foreign Relations published analysis in April 2026, arguing that the real foundation of dollar dominance was never oil pricing. It was American manufacturing output, institutional depth, and military reach. That's probably true. But here's the problem. All three of those foundations are weaker than they were in 1974. Manufacturing as a share of the American economy has shrunk for 50 years. The institutional credibility that made treasuries a safe haven took serious damage during the 2023 banking crisis and the debt ceiling standoffs. And the military reach, the thing Kissinger was selling in that Riyadh meeting, just failed its most visible test in a generation when it couldn't keep the Strait of Hormuz open. Losing reserve currency status doesn't feel like a crash. It feels like a slow loss of options. Interest rates stay higher than they should because foreign demand for your debt is falling. The government offers more to attract buyers. More of the budget goes to interest payments. Less goes to everything else. The currency weakens gradually. Imports get more expensive. Inflation runs hotter than the official numbers suggest. Living standards erode in ways that don't show up cleanly in any single statistic. Britain went from reserve currency holder to IMF bailout in about 30 years. Most British citizens in 1950 didn't feel like they were living through a collapse. They felt like things were just a bit harder than before. That's the mechanism, not a sudden shock, a long unwinding.
The dollar won't disappear from global trade next year or the year after. No alternative is ready. The yuan isn't fully convertible. The euro has its own structural problems. Gold can't move fast enough to settle modern trade volumes. But none of that means the current arrangement survives unchanged. What's more likely is a fragmentation, blocks of countries settling trade in different currencies, the dollar remaining dominant, but no longer unchallenged. American borrowing costs rising slowly, the privilege of running permanent deficits shrinking year by year. The 1974 deal gave America 50 years of borrowing cheap. The deal is off. The bills are coming due. And if history is any guide, and it usually is, the country that held the privilege will be the last to admit it's gone. If you want to understand which empire is positioned to fill that space and why it probably won't look like anything we've seen before, that's the next video. The pattern is older than the dollar, older than sterling, and it's already in motion.